Well, hello, Kate. Welcome to the Red Hot Truth podcast. It's quite funny to have you here because we work together and you just happen to have expertise in the field of science and infectious diseases. And it's really appropriate to welcome you to the Red Hot Truth podcast. So, first of all, as always, welcome.
Thank you, Petra. It's great to be here, and yeah, I think it's a very small world, so it's interesting when we find out what everyone else does in their day-to-day life and how we can apply that and learn from each other.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, I mean, at the moment, there is the coronavirus, and it's causing quite a bit of fear and anxiety and panic around. And I'm particularly interested in exploring this more closely to find out the red hot truth about this, because personally, I don't feel that mainstream media is a good source to go by. And I always like to dig a little bit deeper into things before I make up my mind on how to respond. And so, do tell us a little bit about your background in science and tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, I've always been a fan of research and learning new things. So I did many years of study here in Sydney. Started off with forensic biology and then went into microbiology. So I basically studied for many, many years tiny, tiny, tiny little organisms, and specifically infectious organisms. So ones that affect each and every one of us, ones that affect the hospital setting, ones that affect the general community setting. And that's what I completed my PhD in a few years ago.
Great. Well, then you sound like just the person we want to talk to today. So tell us a little bit about what is a virus and how do we contract a virus?
So a virus is a tiny, tiny, tiny little organism, so tiny that we cannot see it with our own eyes. We need really, really strong microscopes to actually even be able to see a virus. And what that means is that in the day-to-day life, we can't actually see how we're transmitting a virus or how we're even picking one up. Now, they can be transmitted, and what that means is passed from one person to another in a variety of ways. The virus we're talking about today is transmitted through objects and through the air. So it really depends. Viruses are not all the same. They come from a huge family. So it's just like looking at, for example, the animal kingdom, and comparing one virus to another is quite difficult because you might be comparing dogs to birds, basically.
Yeah.
So when we talk about viruses, we have to talk about specific ones.
So you said the coronavirus you can contract through the air and through touch. And so it's my understanding that viruses are contracted predominantly through fluids. Is that accurate?
That's correct. So this particular virus, the coronavirus that we're talking about today, that actually needs to be contracted. It needs to come out through basically your saliva, your mucus, and that is in the form of, say, a kiss, a sneeze, a cough, something like that. And that's because the virus doesn't do a very good job of surviving by itself. So it hijacks our body and our cells, and that's how it survives. So if it can hijack a bit of that mucus and leap out to the world, that's how it can get around. So that one can actually go out, spread through the air. It can stay in the air for up to 3 hours, and it can actually stay on surfaces for up to 3 days. So that's slightly concerning because it means that you really need to be careful about disinfecting your surfaces and being aware who has been there. If you can't be aware, then make sure you disinfect.
So how does the fluid then stay in the air?
Because it's tiny, tiny, tiny particles. So again, we can't really see it. Most people who get infected haven't gone around and gone and sucked up someone else's cough. And that's because it's so light that, it's in the air, it's floating around, and those particles are so small that we can't even see them. So they're light and they can just flow around a bit like pollen almost, you can think of it like.
It's not. So my understanding of something being airborne is that, we can contract it just through breathing. Is that where the virus is now? Because as far as I've heard or seen, it just seems to be predominantly through surfaces.
Oh, we can definitely contract it from breathing it in. So that's why they are asking people who do have the virus or who are suspected to have it to wear face masks, because if someone sneezes, the particles go into the air, we can then breathe in those particles filled with the virus, and that then goes in and infects us. However, face masks do not really protect us from breathing it in because they're not airtight. So you can still breathe it in on the sides and at the top and bottom, for example. And again, that's because the virus is so small. It's if it's in the air, it's probably in a big cloud almost, and you really need to have airtight masks if you want to try and stop anything.
I just have these visions of people wearing these, like those gas masks, like, like a Darth Vader, I am your father. So tell me, how do we know that we may have the coronavirus? So how do we know it's not a common cold or hay fever? So what are the symptoms of the flu?
That's a really good question, and it's actually quite a tricky question because the main symptoms of coronavirus are not unique. So what you want to be looking out for is, do you have a fever? Do you have a dry cough? And do you have basically having any shortness of breath? Now, they're the main symptoms of COVID-19, which is the disease caused by coronavirus. However, you may also have things like a snotty nose, you may have diarrhea, you may have aches and pains. There's so many other symptoms that come with it. And the problem is we don't know enough about it yet. So even though it looks like the world's in sort of a panic, there's so many cases out there. Remember, we only really figured out what this was a few months ago. So we don't have a great answer, and it's hard to actually individualize the symptoms here. So what I would say is, if you have the symptoms that I just described, so the fever, the cough, the shortness of breath, and that's when you need to be contacting your GP.
Yeah, I'd also, it's that interesting space because I feel that when I was at one of the schools and I was running a workshop at the school, it was very, very dusty and I was reacting to the dust and I was coughing a little bit and I was snotting, and it was just sort of last week and it was at the height of this panic. What are we going to do? And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I verbalized, hey, I'm allergic to the dust in this room. So this is why I'm reacting to it, because I feel that, it's a really dangerous place to go looking at anyone who has a bit of a sniffle and then going a bit crazy. So I was just like, I'm fine. It's just dust, right?
Yep. No, that's actually a fantastic point. And it's something that I think is important to share, is you have to know your own body. So, I know that I can get hay fever and dust can set that off and my nose starts running. It can even make me mucousy and coughy, but I know what that feels like. So I can look at myself and go, okay, that's unlikely to be corona. That is likely to be just a standard, I just need to take an antihistamine and I will be fine. So yeah, really make sure you know yourself before you send yourself into any sort of panic.
Yeah, I love that. And know the truth about your body, right? That's really important. I mean, this is what the whole podcast is about, is getting to know yourself and staying true to that. And I do really love that. So is there any recommendations then if someone has contracted the virus? I know that currently the advice is to self-isolate and quarantine yourself. Is there any medication that can be taken, or is it a matter of riding it out?
So the best thing to do in that situation is listen to your doctor, because everyone's cases are going to be different. It depends on what current medications you're on. It depends on if you have any underlying conditions. That will basically change how you deal with the coronavirus. So it's quite unique to each person. If it is just a very mild symptoms that you are dealing with, or if it is asymptomatic, meaning that you don't have any symptoms, the current advice is to self-isolate. So go into quarantine, stay in your house, do not go outside. You can go onto, say, a private area like a veranda or a backyard if you'd like, but don't go out to the shops or anything like that, and do that for 14 days. Otherwise, you do also have to keep in contact with your doctor.
It's interesting because I saw a thing on LinkedIn today, a photo of medical staff saying, respect us by not coming in. And so I thought, well, that's interesting because I know a lot of GPs are asking people not to come in. It's my understanding that there aren't actually that many test kits. So I don't know. Is it a matter of self-isolating maybe and then seeing how you go? And if it gets really bad, then going to your GP? Because I know there is a call out to not actually go in if you don't have to.
Yeah, definitely. So what you need to make sure you do is if you do think you have the symptoms, don't go into your GP, don't go into the hospital. What you want to do is call your GP. So contact your GP, call them up, say, hey, this is my information, this is my background, this is where I've traveled if you've traveled somewhere, and these are the symptoms I'm having. And they will then recommend to you whether you need to get tested, whether you need to self-isolate, whether you need to test and isolate, or, for example, if your symptoms are really bad, then they might tell you, yes, okay, go to the hospital.
Yeah, that's great advice. I had to laugh because I have a wonderful, wonderful friend. She lives in Perth and she's a little bit older. I think she's 75, somewhere around there maybe. And I stayed with her in London. I was having a chat with her and she says, oh, she has an inner ear infection at the moment. And she phoned the doctor and she was just a little bit concerned if she would have to get if she would have to wait with everything that's going on. And then they asked her her birth date, and she goes, "Oh, whatever, 1934, whatever it was." And they go, "No problem, you can come in today."
Oh, lucky, good.
Yeah, yeah, because I feel that they say the elderly are the ones that are suffering the most with this virus. Is there a particular reason why?
It's just because their immune system is not as up to scratch. So people who are extremely young or extremely old, their immune system is not quite up there as with the rest of the adult population. So the elderly, just like in the seasonal flu season, where you see that really affecting the elderly, same thing here. They just don't have that immune system. And often they also are the ones with a lot of underlying health conditions, or they may have lungs that aren't as healthy anymore. And all these things lead to, unfortunately, the death rate in the elderly population becoming higher.
Yeah, I was laughing with my father because my father's 70 now and he lives in Germany. And I'm like, hey, I'm just phoning to see if you're still alive because, yeah, I said, he goes, but I'm lucky to be alive. I'm like, oh, there's way too many oldies in this world anyway. We have to get rid of you somehow. He goes, gee, thanks, man. I said, if you die, just do let me know, right? He goes, yeah, sure. So I want to, there was another thing I heard that the virus doesn't like sunlight. Is that accurate? Have you heard anything about that?
From what I have read, that's not accurate. Basically, they don't know enough about it. If it didn't like sunlight, we probably wouldn't see any infections in Australia. So that in itself proves that it's incorrect because we have people in Australia who are getting infected and we have plenty of sunlight here. I think we still need to understand it better and how it reacts with the seasons. And again, because it's only a few months old, we just don't know enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of want to dig a bit deeper now into the origins. It's my understanding that they said it's jumped from an animal to a human. And I'm very interested in that concept, like how does that work? Has that sort of happened in the past? From your studies and from your experience, have you sort of looked into that a little bit about animals transferring things to humans?
Yeah, so I've looked into it in a very different context, but in the context of viruses, what happens is something known as a mutation. So that's a slight change in how the virus is made, and that is then passed on to its offspring, pretty much, and they pass on this mutation. Now, a mutation can be anything from it becoming a stickier virus, so it may be able to stick to its host, so the person or the animal it infects better. It may make it be able to reproduce quicker. It may make it deadlier. It may make it weaker, so it may actually kill itself off. And it's all just this random mutation idea. And what has to happen is a random mutation has to get picked up by the virus that affects how it can or who it can latch onto. So before, it had these little arms out there, and they're known as spike proteins, and that's what it uses to latch on to its host, the thing it's going to infect. And if it gets a mutation in those, it may be able to latch onto something new. So they currently think it may have come from a bat, because that's the closest genetic-wise that we've found. We found a similar type of coronavirus in bats. And what could have happened is it mutated there, and that actually allowed it to latch onto a human host. The other theory that I have read is that it perhaps was in the bat, it then mutated to latch onto the human host, and then it mutated further to become something that is the coronavirus we see today. So it may have been something that didn't cause any illness, and then it mutated again. I think it's most likely that it mutated within the animal, so potentially the bat, and then was able to be transmitted to the human host.
Well, I've had a few people tell me that they believe it's actually a man-made virus, and that they believe that it was designed to create economic breakdown. So this is what I've heard. Have you heard anything along those lines?
I've seen it thrown around places. I have researched that as well, and there is no evidence to show that it is man-made at this stage. None whatsoever. You can generally see, you look at the genetic structure and you go, is it something that looks similar to the wild, or is it something that looks like it's been mushed together in a lab? As I said, it's quite something that is quite similar to what's found in bats. The other thing that I want to say here is that when people start to spread these quote-unquote conspiracy theories as such, it takes away from the seriousness of the disease itself. So, we shouldn't really be worried about the government's possibly releasing a pathogen or it escaped from a lab. We need to be worried about what's happening in the world right now. We have a massive pandemic that we are facing, and we really do need to take that seriously.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing your view on that. I sort of want to look right now a little bit more closely at the figures around the world, because I don't watch the news and I don't listen to the news. It's something I haven't done in years. And what people tell me, I feel it's sort of presented so enormously. And yet I've had a look at the Australian government health website. It says that in Australia there have been 874 cases and 7 deaths. So that means in Australia we average about 25 million people. So that means 0.0034% of people have got it. So I just want to highlight that a little bit, because yes, I fully acknowledge that we want to be careful. I just really want to encourage people not to panic. That's really my big thing here, because even in the world, I don't know, have you had a chance to look at the stats, Kate, in the world? I've got them here.
Yeah. I've had a chance. One thing I would say there is Australia is actually already over 1,000. So these stats are getting updated hourly, and yeah, we ticked over 1,000, I think 2 or 3 hours ago. But it depends on the source that you look at, because some of them are only getting updated every 6 hours or every day.
Absolutely. No, and exactly. So give or take, there's the World Health Organization currently, from what I said here, there's 234,073 confirmed cases, 9,840 deaths. So that's in 176 countries. Once again, that adds up to like 0.03% or something. I don't have the figures right in front of me. So, I mean, I acknowledge that it's serious. Just for me, in my mind, it's not quite as in the great scheme of things, in the great population of people. I just don't feel it's as big as the media make it out to be. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point to make, because we are at a very small percentage of the population at the moment. There are a few key points within that. Firstly, what we are seeing is the start of the virus. Again, it's only been around for a few months, It's only just started to climb up in Australia here. And what that means is we are not at the middle of this. We are not at the end of this. We are just at the beginning. So those numbers are current numbers, but those numbers are good in the sense that the best we're going to be until tomorrow when the numbers are going to get higher, until next week when they're going to be even higher. So what we need to do at this moment is there's no need for panic. It's not going to wipe out the world. It's not going to be some sort of apocalyptic event. But what we do need to do is take it seriously and try to prevent the spread of the disease, because if we can prevent people from dying, why not try and do that, And it doesn't mean you have to go buy 48 packets of toilet paper to do that. It just means, maybe don't hang out with 20 of your mates over the weekend getting beers or getting dinner. Really try and reel back in your social events, self-isolate if you can, and wash your hands. That's the best thing you can do. The other thing that I'd sort of say with the numbers is the key word you used there was confirmed cases. So they are people who have had the symptoms, gone in, got the swab, and got the test back to say, yep, you have coronavirus. Mm-hmm. What that doesn't look at, and what I think is out there, is all the people who maybe don't have symptoms, so they haven't been tested, or don't fit the criteria for testing, so they haven't been tested. So the numbers that are being reported are fair, and that's the numbers that should be reported, but you have to think about how many people are out there, especially in Australia at the moment, because we're not testing that many people. How many people have been exposed to that virus without actually realising and could be potentially passing it around? So that's just another thing to keep in mind is, again, there's no need to panic about it, but just be considerate of your space and be considerate of your personal hygiene.
Yeah, great advice. And also from what I see by the figures, people, you do recover from it. Like, it's not, the deaths compared to the recovery are quite low. So once again, be mindful of that. Yeah, be conscious of not spreading it, and also understand that you do recover from it. So just give yourself the time and the space. I wonder what advice you have then for people who have families and kids, because they say self-isolate, and yet if you have children, what do you do then? What do you do if you do have the virus and you have the family around you? What advice can we give those people?
So most people who are having to isolate, who have the virus and have a family, they're often isolating themselves in a particular room of the house. So they're still at home with their family, assuming their symptoms are mild enough to do so, and they're, sort of locking themselves in the attic, locking themselves in the second bedroom, and getting on with life. Now, it's not ideal, but what that means is it saves you from giving the virus to your family, which you don't want to do, and spreading it anywhere else. So, and in saying that, if you don't have the virus and you're self-isolating with your family, that's what lots of families are doing. We can currently see in America, and they're just carrying on as usual, making lots of silly online videos to keep themselves entertained and things like that.
The interesting thing, someone told me about America, we were just comparing notes about how different countries are responding to it, and they were saying to me, Australia stockpiles toilet paper, Americans are stockpiling guns. And I thought, wow, that sounds about accurate. So I was like, rather be in Australia. And Dad was saying, yes, in Germany, they're stockpiling toilet paper too. So, and I'm so curious to know where this started. Like, I am so curious to know how this toilet paper thing started. Do you know why people are stocking toilet paper instead of water?
Yeah, I don't have a great answer. The best answer that I can come up with is people, especially when they panic, love to follow other people. It's basic, some basic psychology. If you see someone run and grab 3 toilet rolls, it's likely you want to go and run and grab 3 toilet rolls because you don't want to miss out on those toilet rolls. You don't know what's going on with the toilet rolls, but you don't want to miss out on them because they could be some good toilet rolls. So I think it's a little bit of silly human behavior thrown in there. It's also a possibility that these people have, panicked. They've gone, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. They've Googled apocalypse prepper and they've gone onto some doomsday prepper sites. And the doomsday prepper sites have told them, you need toilet paper, you need your canned foods, you need your rice, you need your tampons, you need your condoms. And that's what we've seen completely fly off the shelf, because I think there's people who don't really get the concept of what's happening, but they're freaking out and they want to stockpile whatever they can.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I wanted to speak with you, because I feel as responsible adults or just responsible human beings, and this is what the Red Hot Truth is really about, is start being curious, start inquiring. Do not be a truth seeker. Do not follow the masses. That's where hysteria comes from. And this is really why I appreciate speaking to you and getting your insights on it, because I trust you and I trust your opinions and your recommendations on this. And now I feel I can make an informed decision on what I want to do next, and the audience can. So I really encourage, everyone who's listening, listen to what Kate's saying, take the necessary precautions. Do not get swept up in the hysteria of buying toilet paper and overstocking things. It's not necessary. So share the toilet paper. But it's not necessary. Just be mindful and be conscious of how you're behaving. And and share this interview with everyone so that they can make informed decisions too. So, Kate, I really want to thank you for your time today, and thank you for sharing your expertise. I do acknowledge that it's a bit of a difficult one to comment on because it's so new and it's so evolving, and you've done your best to look at what the figures are, what the information is now, and you've given us your best information on what you have right now, and we'll just have to observe and see where it goes next. So thank you for your time today. Was there anything else you wanted to add to your fabulous expertise?
All I want to say is wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, and try and limit your social interactions as well as you can.
So no licking each other. Look, I know if you've got fetishes, just leave it alone. Stop those. Thank you so much, Kate. That was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on the Red Hot Truth.
That's a wrap, sisters. Remember to love us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you have not already, sign up to The Red Hot Truth or theredhottruth.com for tips for coaches specifically. Share this interview, share the love, share the support, and remember to live your Red Hot Truth and to blossom.